Good evening and welcome to the Cabinet meeting of the 13th of February. Happy Chinese New Year to all those who have joined us. And don't forget, we've got the fantastic celebration this weekend in Chatham. Let's move to agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. We've got apologies tonight from Tracy Coombs. Item number 2, record of decisions. Are colleagues happy for me to sign the record of the 16th of January?
Yes, please sign.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 3, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Anyone, anything to declare? No one is interesting tonight. Let's move on to the first substantive item then, which is the final funding formula for mainstream schools and academies. In Tracy's absence, Adam, you're going to take this item, please. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. Councillor Tracy Coombs, my colleague, is away on leave at the moment, so it's fallen to me to present this item. The Schools Forum, which you've heard about at previous meetings, met again on the 19th of January to consider issues relating to the final formula and agreed to recommend to Cabinet to approve the implementation of the final funding formula. The final funding formula has distributed 75.3% through the basic entitlement factors, distributed 93.5% through the pupil-led factors, and reintroduced a 5% cap on gains per pupil. This was required to balance the formula, and it was a reserved action as part of the provisional formula. The final funding formula has also reduced the basic entitlement unit costs for all education phases. Primary schools will receive at least £4,610 per pupil. Just getting to the right bit on the page there. All unit costs and other factors except the lump sum and the basic entitlement have been set using the NFF unit costs and levels. So there's a requirement for all local authorities to submit their final funding formulas by the 22nd of January of this year, which is obviously passed now. Owing to the Schools Forum meeting, which could not be held until the 19th of January, this matter could not be brought forward to Cabinet until the 13th of February, where we are now, which is after the ESFA deadline. So officers did submit a draft final formula to the ESFA, subject to Cabinet approval this evening. So this report also proposes to waive the call-in in order to allow officers to inform the ESFA that Cabinet has approved the formula without delay in order to meet the regulations. And please note this is the same process every year. So Cabinet is therefore asked to instruct officers to implement the final funding formula for mainstream schools and academies for 2024 to 25, and to agree that it is considered as urgent and therefore should not be subject to call-in as set out in recommendations 1.1 and 1.2 of the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Adam. Any questions, comments from colleagues? I mean, I think I put on record my thanks to the Schools Forum for their ongoing partnership working in these challenging times. And of course, it is very rare for us to not have the right of call-in, but as the deadline has already passed, we need to get on with this specific piece of work. Yeah. There's no other colleague. Adam, anything in closing before we move to the vote?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues in favour of that? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next agenda item then, which is Council Tax Reduction Scheme 24-25. Zoe, over to you.
Right. In light of Medway Council's difficult financial position, not of the current administration's making, maintaining the council reduction scheme, the council tax reduction scheme for resident council taxpayers with a low income remains vital. The scheme provides relief to assist families on a low income or receiving certain benefits and includes residents who either own or rent their homes. This may include both unemployed and working residents. Eligibility requires that the claimant is 18 plus, on a low income, has under £16,000 worth of savings, capital or pension credit, is liable for council tax and is not in full-time education. The value of their home is disregarded. The options for decision are to maintain the current levels of relief or to uprate them in line with CPI rates of inflation. A further option could have been to revise or replace the current scheme, but in the event that this were proposed, it would need to be adopted no later than the 11th of March 2024, likely to place further financial and logistical pressures for drafting and consideration of a new scheme, which would require adoption by full council, which is not considered. This option is therefore rejected, leaving the following. Option 1, retention of the current income bands would lead to some claimants finding their incomes would increase by 6.7%, but causing them to fall into a band that offers a lower level of support with their council tax and potentially causing financial hardship. This could lead to inability to meet their outstanding obligations and an additional collection burden on the council due to accumulation of arrears. Option 2 would be uprating the current income bands by CPI rates of inflation and would mean that most affected residents would not see changes to the level of support that they receive. Those negatively affected by this option would then have recourse to the exceptional hardship scheme. The financial effect of this proposal would be in the region of £300,000. It's proposed, therefore, that option 2, to uprate the income bands by CPI rates of inflation, is it is proposed for submission to full council on the 29th of February.
Thank you very much indeed. So before I throw it open to any other member, I think I'd want to say a couple of bits on this. Firstly, absolutely recognise that this particular policy has improved over the last couple of years, that the change in the fundamental structure was the right thing to do, and we supported that. And I think by taking forward option 2 tonight, we continue to support that and recognise that if it stands still, actually people will end up in more financial difficulty, particularly during this cost of living crisis. Secondly, if we had a better financial situation for this council generally, we would look to change this scheme, make it more generous. There's no doubt of that. We're on the record of saying that. But as we'll be talking a lot tonight, actually, we're having to make some really incredibly difficult decisions. This is one of them. Our position on this as the opposition group is well documented. We'd like to go further and faster, but simply that is not possible at this particular time because of the financial situation this council, like so many across the country, find itself in. Any other colleague on this technical report? Teresa, please.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Zoe, and thank you to officers for coming forward with what is the most pragmatic option. I think it's extremely important to say, look, council tax is completely outdated. And along with all of the finances that we're trying to manage at the moment, merits a long and hard look at the way that things are done. So I think we've come to a conclusion here that is the best we can do in the circumstances, but it's one that we'll always want to keep an eye on. And for as long as we have the Household Support Fund and our own strategy for helping struggling families, we can try to mitigate some of the effects of this. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that we're still trying to do that. So I do want to send a message to people that we want to help. We're in straitened circumstances, and we're very aware of what impact this will have on people as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I can see no other colleagues, so Zoe, back to you for any closing remarks.
I think it speaks for itself, really. We can't put our residents on low incomes in a worse position that they already are in, and that we need to support option 2.
Thank you very much. Of course, we'll be making the decision to recommend to full council at the budget meeting on the 29th. The colleagues in favour?
Yes.
Agree. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to the next agenda item, which falls to me, which is the Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25. I want to move the recommendations as laid out in paragraph 1. In particular, I want to thank colleagues on the Audit Committee. They always take a very deep dive onto this particular report, rightfully so. So their comments as laid out in section 6 are very much welcome, and I think we certainly support a lot of what's been said in there. It's worth the backdrop of the impact of the, frankly, the Liz Truss financial experiment, which still all these months on, is having a direct impact on our Treasury management strategy, on the inflation we see, on the interest rates we see, and everything else. Colleagues will be aware, obviously, we've had a couple of specifics when we've been reviewing this since May around one particular scheme. That continues to be reviewed. There's no conclusion to the Lothbury scheme yet, but I will, of course, update all Cabinet members, and thanks to Lauren Edwards for originally raising that at our first meeting when we looked at the Treasury management strategy. I'll probably leave it at that point. Obviously, we will take this forward if it's agreed tonight, but it's recognising, of course, that it is impacted quite substantially by those financial scenarios we find ourselves in from a national perspective. So I'll pause at that point, see if colleagues have got anything they wish to add at this point. No? Okay. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item then. Item 7, the Revenue Budget Monitoring Round 3. And it's worth saying, obviously, as we look at this, this is a first good opportunity to recognise now that the SITFA report that's been published, and we'll talk more about that, obviously, in the budget setting item later on, but actually some of the work and recommendations that we have in this particular report are as a result of those conversations and that expertise that we brought in. So my thanks both to SITFA but also to the LGA and ADAS colleagues who look specifically at adult social care. And in both those cases, you can see the pressures remain on our overall budget, but also specifically on the adult social care budget. But I'm sure Teresa will say something around some of the findings, interesting findings from that particular report. One of the things, of course, that we will be doing if this is agreed tonight is recommending to Council that we declassify 3 earmarked reserves. That, again, will get us to a point, hopefully, if all other assumptions are fulfilled, of being able to complete this financial year that we're currently in. Of course, reserves can only be spent once, can only be moved once, so that is not a sustainable situation, but it gets us to the point of where we were. And it's worth, I would say, finally recognising specifically that in last year's budget, this time last year, they had a budget that was built on reserves and then needed additional reserves to finally balance it. The amount of reserves that were used for last year's budget were more than were left when we took control back in May. So it just shows the sustainability of our revenue budget in particular over the last couple of years has not been sustainable. And that's why, in my view, it absolutely was the right thing to do to bring in SITFA, both to look at future years, which we'll talk about later on, but importantly, in balancing this. I want to finally, before I open it up to the floor, thank colleagues around the table and the Richard, your senior management team, corporate management team, the team of 25, continue to work day in, day out to find savings for this year. Again, making really difficult decisions in trying to balance this year's budget, which in some cases, of course, will have future effects as well. So I'll pause at that point and open it up to other colleagues for comments. Teresa.
Yes, thank you, Vince. And I think, the assumptions that we've made here, the recommendations we'll be making to full council, we're doing with heavy hearts and determined heads. And I think the context, the national context, is incredibly important. There's a £40 billion gap for local councils across the country. 1 in 4 councils say that they will go bust in the next 5 years if nothing changes. Public services have been completely hollowed out by this government, and they have done so knowingly and actually, in some cases, vindictively. And anyone who's supported them should hang their heads in shame, because we're in this situation today because of the government policies that have ignored actually the pleas of local councils of all parties now. But what I would say to our previous Conservative administration and to all Conservative administrations, that those crocodile tears are too little, too late. The damage is done, and we're left with picking it up. On a positive note, in a degraded situation, I feel confident that the budget assumptions we have made can be successful because we've made them together. We've taken a completely different approach. We've, each one of us around this table, worked with the people in the divisions that we are cabinet members responsible for from the beginning. We've worked from the bottom up. We've listened to what staff have had to say. We've put forward ideas, we've listened to their ideas, we've come to the finance together to talk about the proposals that people have made, and can be sure and certain that they are proposals that we can deliver and still keep the most vulnerable people in our communities safe. And I do thank all of the staff who have been through that very painful process, who see the great work that they do in danger of toppling over because the situation is so fragile, and yet they've still come forward with innovative plans, good ideas, and been determined to work with us. And that was noticed by SIPFA. The approach that we've taken, a different approach, a more open, transparent and collegiate approach, was noticed by SIPFA and noticed by partners in cares. And I think that is something to be quite proud of. And I've been impressed by people's optimism and their willingness to innovate. And we are going to do something, Vince, and you'll be leading on this, that has not been done before in the budgets of this council. We're going to monitor the savings, and we're going to do that down to the last penny, and we're going to do that on a regular basis, not put a budget forward and expect that everything is just going to happen all alone, or carry a budget, for example, that had £4 million of property disposals in it for a decade and nothing was ever sold or sorted out. We won't do that. The things that we intend to do are real, and we're going to continue to do them together to support the staff. We have got their backs, and in the context of the people of Medway, we're determined to keep our services going. So I say to DLUC and to everybody else, this is your fault. You have deliberately done this to local councils with no compunction at all. A new Labour government won't be able to reorganise local government as the first thing they do. But we just spent the weekend, Vince and I, Councillor Edwards and other councillors, with all Labour councillors, the biggest party in local government now, together for the weekend, listening to Angela Rayner, listening to her plans for local councils, understanding the position that we're in, recognising it, wanting to help, determined that people will have good services under a Labour government. And I know that when we get new local MPs, they'll want to help us with that too. So the future is bright. The sun's just behind the clouds. But for the meantime, what we've got to do is hold the line, hold our nerve, and work together to make sure that we get this budget through.
Thank you, Teresa. Nashaba, please.
Thanks, Vince. And I agree with a lot of the comments that have already been made. Obviously, I support the report that is in front of us today, but this has been a really difficult process, and we are in a position where we have inherited something that is in, as SIPFA said, in a grave financial situation that's set out in the report. And I think for me, we've previously, as in opposition, highlighted the fact that there was an over-reliance on reserves by the previous administration, and that has been a huge challenge, and it has meant that it places us in a difficult position as an authority. I think for me, the key thing there really is the failure to call out national government and what they were doing over those years, and putting sticking plaster on the council budget has meant that we've now ended up in a position where tough decisions have had to be made and are going to have to be made. And we've seen since we've had the government in place, we've seen 91% cuts from the revenue fund that we used to receive. That's not easy to manage as local authorities. And what's happened is that the Conservatives have essentially masked the cuts, austerity, through local councils. That's what's happened. So they've chopped away at the services for local people, and for a long time, local government has taken that burden, done what they can, worked really hard to try and make it work, and it's now reached breaking point, and it can't do it any longer. And that's what we're seeing up and down the country. And that's really where national government has to take this seriously, because absolutely, as I say, I support the report in front of us today, but this is not the place that anybody around this table wanted to be in. This is not the position that we want to be in, and this is not how local government finances should be working. We have to look at the pressures that we're facing, and this should not be where we are as a current state of affairs. So I think we cannot take that away from the fact that national government haven't done their job properly here, and that they have hidden austerity over a decade through local government, and now people and our services are having to pay the price of that. And I don't think that should be forgotten quickly.
Thank you very much, Nashaba. Simon, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Vincent. And again, picking up on comments from colleagues, I mean, we're going to see throughout this agenda this evening where the impact of not having the resources we need to deliver our basic services is going to start biting really hard. And it's a legacy left by the previous administration, but I primarily put the blame on this government and the 14 years of austerity that we've had. I mean, we have got roads full of potholes because we just simply haven't had the funding in highways authorities to deal with it. And that's not new. That doesn't happen overnight. That happens after years of infrastructure not being funded properly and things like that. And we see it also from the infrastructure side, we see it, but we also see it in the lives of the people. Food banks are now normal. They've been normalised over this process because people can no longer afford things and the local authorities don't have the resources to help them. It's as simple as that. Why does poverty become normal in our society? One of the richest nations in the world, apparently. So it really does. The blame really lies with this government. And I think we need to make that loud and clear to all the people of Medway that we have got plans, we're making them happen, we're putting them in place. It's going to be difficult. As Teresa said, there is a cloud behind, there's a silver lining in the cloud, or the sun is shining behind, and we've got to get through this. It won't be easy, but there is a plan in place that's starting to take place now, and we should be able to get through it, but it's going to be difficult.
Thank you, Simon, Nashaba and Teresa. Very, very helpful comments. I'll move back to the recommendations. Obviously, like I say, this is Q3, and one of the things that is worth noting as well from the SITFA report is they've requested and suggested additional monitoring, and as Teresa rightfully says, we'll start bringing that forward. This is not our budget. We're not monitoring our budget. This is the previous administration's budget. We're having to deal with that. And again, it's based on that backdrop of last year's budget, having been built on reserves, then using additional reserves. So that's why we've ended up with this for Q3. Work has continued. We are in a better place than we were at the end of Q3 because that work has continued. And as we'll see later on in the agenda, absolutely recognising that for the budget we'll bring forward on February the 29th, as proposed in item 14 later tonight, we're having to take some incredibly difficult decisions. And that is, as Simon says, because of that backdrop of the 91% cut in revenue support grants since 2010. That's where this lies, and we will keep telling people that because that's the truth. Colleagues, are you happy to support the recommendations for item 7? Thank you. Let's move on then to item 8, which is the capital monitoring for round 3. There's a typographic in the second recommendation. It should, where it says 12.1 to 12.5, it should be 11.1 to 11.5. So I'll be moving the recommendation as laid out there. This is straightforward, and I think actually one of the things you can see from this report is that even with these difficult times, difficult challenges, this administration is getting to work on a lot of stuff we said we would do before May the 4th, and we're getting on with that, whether that's tackling the housing crisis, reinvigorating our town centres, and so much more. So you can see there, actually in 12.1 to 12.5, sorry, 11.1 to 11.5, some of the works we've brought forward. Again, a mixture of borrowing, but also, making sure we're using capital grants wherever available as well. I'll pause at that point, just see if there's any questions or comments from colleagues. No, pretty straightforward. Okay, is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. Let's then move on to item 9, capital additions, Wharf. Nashaba, over to you.
Thanks, Vince. So I'm bringing this report forward in the context of, I know, a hugely challenging financial situation, but this report deals with Wharf as our council headquarters, and this follows news earlier last year, or the end of last year, that there was rack in the roof that was found at Wharf, which meant that the building as it currently stands can no longer be used for the purposes that we had. We've now gone away and done quite a bit of work and looked into that in terms of what is possible, how do we deal with the rack issue, but also what does that mean for council services and having Wharf as our HQ. So the report sets out and asks for full council the addition of £20 million to be added to the council's capital programme, which would be funded through potential borrowing, and that would essentially deliver a programme of essential repairs and improvements to Gun Wharf in order for it to be brought back into use in the way that we would like to use a functioning building. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight when we look at this report, and obviously happy to take any questions from colleagues, but first and foremost, we have explored other options and looked at other avenues, but actually looking at it in the round, this still seems the most financially viable and sensible way to take forward. Another thing that we have also done is spoken to our staff, many of whom are Medway residents, and there is a general consensus that the need to have a central council working area is really, really important, and there's lots of benefits that come through that. And I know that we're not the only organisation that would have got those reviews. Lots and lots of other organisations are finding that people do, even despite home working and flexible working, they still want to have that space where colleagues can meet, where services can be provided, and where there's the opportunity for collaboration and work. So that's a really important part of our thinking as well. Because we have explored options around potentially not even having that central hub and actually looking at everything in the round, that wouldn't be a good option to future-proof us. The other things just to think about is obviously we do have the MOJ as tenants at Gun Wharf, and this will allow us to continue that relationship and ensure they have that security there as well. And this gives us an opportunity to make the building more fit for purpose, more welcoming and open, which I think is something that a lot of people would welcome. And within that, there is also the opportunity to explore going forward if there's ways that we could work with the wider community and use this as a asset that is more widely shared. It is a big building, it is a big site. So again, there's some opportunities there that we would like to explore. I think it's worth noting that this is obviously, we're having lots of discussions about our revenue budget, but this is coming through capital, so it means that it's that longer term investment that will not be a year-on-year pressure on our budget, but appreciate it is a significant sum of money. And the other thing just to mention is that the building is listed. So that has also been part of our considerations when looking at this, because it really does limit the options as to what is possible when you have a listed building, because the other option would be that, say we were to vacate Gun Wharf, it would be standing there potentially empty. There's very few options available to us for what we can do with it. So actually bringing it back into use in a fit-for-purpose council building is a really good step forward. And then finally, just to add to this, I appreciate that the rack issue has been something that has, wasn't one that we were expecting, and it has been something that has appeared over time in a very short space of time, and something that we had to deal with very quickly as a new administration. Certainly haven't been short of some of those issues to look at. But that said, this does come down to how our council assets have been looked at over a period of time, and why the former administration weren't investing properly in some of the buildings that we do have. And we're now in a situation where years of underinvestment have meant that we're potentially in a situation where we're going to be dealing with some difficult decisions because the money wasn't invested in the first place. And I think Gun Wharf, sadly, is one of those buildings that has been a victim of that.
Thank you very much indeed, Nashaba. Teresa.
Yes, thank you, Nashaba. And I think that this is a really sensible and pragmatic way forward out of a difficult situation. And as you say, I think everybody felt a bit blindsided by it. But we already knew that the building was in a state of neglect, that there had been no proper depreciation budget and no proper maintenance budget for years. And that's not the way that anybody around this table would want our staff to be treated, or members of the public coming into the building, that after all is their building, funded by their money. I don't want them to be treated in that neglectful way either. So I do think this is a really good way forward. I think we can make the most of the building, and certainly I've heard from all of the teams in my portfolio that they enjoy the ability to be together, not just because they want to be supportive colleagues, but because they enjoy the ability to discuss things together face to face, to find a manager when they need one if something goes wrong, to innovate and share ideas. And after coming through COVID, when that hasn't been possible, they really welcome the ability to be back together again. And everyone's done their best. I do thank the property team for making at least part of the building safe so that we can have some space there. And I do thank all of the staff who are working there including our very senior staff who have moved around to make room for other people and still carried on their day-to-day jobs. It's been a real joint effort to make sure that we can get the best out of Gun Wharf. And what you said, Nashaba, about the Ministry of Justice, it's not just important because we can turn an income for that. It's really critical that the family court is able to operate in Medway, one of the biggest and busiest family courts in the whole of the South East, dealing with the care of our children, dealing with family disputes and making sure that children are safe. So they need to have a safe and comfortable building as well, and we've had to be very mindful of that. The fact that Gun Wharf is listed, brutalist architecture may not be to everybody's taste, but it's part of our towns, and actually I like it. It's our bit, like the National Theatre, and we should be quite proud of that and make sure that people understand the history of the building, the history of the way it was. And I can see Councillor Marhill looking at me, a fan of the Gothic, but I'm more of a modernist, and I like Gun Wharf, and I'm looking forward to making it a comfortable, proper environment that it's supposed to be for everybody.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. I've got Simon, then Adam.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to Nashaba and to the whole team who worked so hard to get this through, because this came as a real shock in October, I think it was last year. And to get as far as we have so quickly has been a real testament to how hard the officers have worked to make this happen. And it's a huge challenge, but I think also, unfortunately, I'm more in sort of horrendous territory in this. It's a nice location by the river, and it's got some lovely gardens around it and a lovely riverside walk. But nevertheless, there is also an opportunity here. Obviously, within my remit of climate change, we can look at how we refit the building, make it much more energy efficient, make it much more sort of sustainable for the long term in terms of its energy consumption and such stuff like that. And there's some shining examples coming through in Medway, such as at Mid-Kent College, where they're doing some brilliant work to refit their large buildings that they've got to make them much more fit for purpose for the 21st century and much more climate friendly. And we can be doing this similar sort of work within Gun Wharf now as well. So there is a bit of a silver lining in there, subject to the amount of budget that's available for all the work that has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adam?
Yes, thank you, Vince. I'd like to thank Nashaba and the rest of the team for all the work that's actually gone into this. I mean, the fact is that the previous administration that was in power for a number of years, they failed to fix the roof whilst the sun was shining.
Literally.
And they failed to fix it even when it was raining, and all of those seasons that have gone by. By now stepping ahead to actually sort this out, we're also taking the opportunity to improve how it is going to be for when the public start coming into the building again, not the horrible situation which has previously been the case, whereby you go to the reception and then you're waved into the corner to a landline phone extension, and someone's put through to you like you're in the naughty corner, etc. That's not the way to treat our residents. So we're taking the opportunity to modernise it, make it much more consumer friendly, and to fix the roof, which the previous Conservative administration failed to do. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you, Adam. I can't see anybody else giving their views on brutalist architecture or anything else. A couple of bits from me. Nashaba, thanks to the whole team who have made this happen, as Simon said, so very quickly. This is a complex capital issue at the best of times. Made more challenging because, of course, there are not that many RAC experts in the UK. So making sure they're doing the tests, making sure we know what's needed is important. Teresa is absolutely right. This is not an administration who wants to force people to work at home or work in the office. We want them to be working flexibly and efficiently. And at the moment, people can't get into the office having had that forced upon them previously due to COVID. The staff have been incredible, flexible, determined, and continuing to deliver for the residents of Medway. The issue of the Ministry of Justice is really important, and I know you're taking a personal interest in that element as long with all the rest of it. I pay tribute to Perry Holmes and Clive Johnson, who actually really pushed hard to make sure we didn't lose that facility from Medway, and we've now got to make sure that it stays where it is at the moment. Look, it's important to say this, is that this might seem a big figure. It is a big figure for a capital spend. But what I've got confidence in is that figure will be robust. If we look at another council meeting happening tonight in Kent, they're looking at a project on the issue of RAC that was supposed to cost just under £1.5 million that rose to nearly £3 million for building a temporary theatre. That's not managing the process of a capital programme, albeit temporarily. I've got absolute confidence that with this capital programme, the work that's gone into it in a quick but efficient way, we'll be holding every penny of that collectively to account, because that's what we do. So this is the right decision. Absolutely, I'm very supportive of this. I'm grateful to all those who have worked hard on this. And this is not something that, of course, will be fixed overnight, but we'll, of course, keep residents fully informed as we go through that. And 2 final points on this. The excellent point you made around community use, I think that's really important. We need to be, you know, I hate the phrase, but sweating that asset when it's up and running. We need to make sure it truly is for everybody. And actually that includes when residents first walk into the building. And actually it's got to feel like their council, rather than at the moment it feels like anything but that. And I want to place on record my thanks to all those organisations and individuals who reached out in those very early days to say, if you need a space, if you need a room, you know, a genuine, if you wanted a tangible example, people hear me talk about One Medway a lot. If you want a tangible example of what does that look like, it was all those individuals and organisations stepping up at our time of difficulty. And they continue to do that today. That hasn't gone away just because we're not necessarily talking about it every day. So really pleased, and thanks to you personally and to the whole team who brought this report forward in a quicker time than I anticipated, and that's welcome. Back to you.
Thank you, and thank you to colleagues for your support tonight, but also recognising the really hard work that the officer team have put into this, and as you say, turned it around in a very short space of time, recognising the urgency of how we need to take this forward. The other thing just to say is that I completely take on board the comments around future-proofing, and I think they're really, really important in what we bring forward, as well as the sustainability element, as Simon has rightfully highlighted, and sort of learning what works. There are lots of examples across the country of council offices and buildings that work in a way that are collaborative, are open and welcoming, and I think we have an opportunity to make sure that we are also in that position as we bring this forward. So yes, thanks for the support on the report. Just to put on the record, I believe Councillor Marhill is a big supporter of the architecture and is actually really does like the building, so I don't want that to be misconstrued tonight.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed? Thank you very much, everybody. Let's move on to the next item, 10, looking at adult social care, structural review and budget addition. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you, Vincent, and thank you to everybody who has supported what is an investment in a service that really needs it. I want to start by reminding people of the duties of under the Care Act that local authorities have towards every single person living in our area, promoting individual well-being, preventing needs for care and support, promoting integration of care and support with health services, providing information and advice, providing diversity and quality in the provision of services, cooperating, safeguarding adults at risk of abuse or neglect. And we will soon be judged by the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, under a new duty assessing how we deliver those needs. People in Medway are well cared for by our staff, who do absolutely the best that they can. But this is another example of a kind of absolutely thoughtless degrading of an essential service. In the last 5 years, the service has lost £9 million in grant. So when people start shouting about stuff that's come through, extra funding for social care, that sort of extra funding definitely hasn't come through. Some funding has been restored, but it has done nothing to fill the gap. And into the mix come all of our staff, our social workers, our occupational therapists, our social care officers, people who work in home care who are contracted by us, unpaid carers who need our support right across Medway, who look after their loved ones lovingly and willingly for a pittance, actually, for carers' allowance. So we've had to take action here, because if we don't take this action, we won't be able to meet our statutory duties. One of the things that has happened is that in 2019, and this is absolutely a local situation, there was a reorganisation that hollowed out our own services. It reduced people's wages, it took away heads of service, it left the service in a situation where the senior managers had huge spans of control, trying to keep everything going. And if people have a look at the table on page 271, you will see just how much demand has risen. If I just give you a couple of examples, requests for support from new clients as a percentage of the population aged 65 has risen from 13% to 16%, massive rise in just a few years across all of the social care support. You can see it there on the table. We have seen a degraded, denuded service on a massive rising curve of demand. So it's not very surprising that we've got huge waiting lists for annual reviews, big waiting lists for financial assessments, and waiting lists for people going into care homes, because of course we haven't got any council care homes anymore. We're relying on a market. It is not that this money has gone away, actually. A lot of this money is still churning around the system, but it's actually gone into private equity, who pull out as soon as they can't make a profit. So this paper is the start of a whole renewal of adult social care in Medway. We'll have another paper coming to Cabinet, Care for Medway, where we will be considering building our own facilities, building back what was lost, building it better, making sure that our residents have an excellent service. So I thank the staff for putting this work together, being able to show a picture of why we need this money, and by investing in it, we'll be able to meet our statutory obligations, keep people safe, show the CQC that at the very least we understand our own services and we're going in the right direction. But more than that, look after everybody who deserves to look after. And I do remind people, this is not just the fact that we've got lots of people getting older, although we have. We've got lots of younger people who need looking after for the whole of their lives, who are disabled. We've got people who have accidents in the middle of their lives, and their working life and their whole life is disrupted and everything changes for them. They are the people that come to the council when they need care, and we are here for them. And what we want to do is make sure that we give them the very best service that we can. And all of those carers, family carers, if we don't look after them, they'll be in a state of collapse and put more of a burden on the council. And into this mix, we're working with our health partners, absolutely. I'm pleased that the ICB have shown a real interest in this, and our health partners don't think that social care is a Cinderella service anymore. They understand that the local hospital will collapse under huge pressure as it is if we can't help them get people out of hospital more quickly. So this is a cooperative thing right across the sector. For Labour, health and social care are two sides of the same coin. We want to make sure that both of those services are looked after, and this is our start locally to restore the things that have been taken away from a service that couldn't afford to lose them, to make sure that we have a really good service locally, and that the things that we do enable us to modernise the service, to restore learning and development, all of the things that have lost, be an attractive employer of choice, and by doing so, find that we don't have to have 35% of our social workers from agencies, as is the situation now. Because we will be an employer of choice, people will understand that we want social care services in Medway for adults to be absolutely the best that they can be. They will want to work with us. And so if you're studying to be a social worker, I met 4 social workers at the lovely Welcome to 4 social work students from Kent University at the Welcome to Medway event today. Please come and work for us, I said. You'll have a good experience. They all gave me their details. I'm going to hook them up with our newly qualified social workers who I've been meeting and keeping in touch with. And, you know, little by little, brick by brick, with this injection of cash, we'll get back to where we need to be.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. Looking for any other colleague? No, I think before I come back to you for any final remarks on this, Teresa, I think I'd say a couple of bits. Firstly, we have talked about, you know, we had 5 clear pledges. People know that the residents of Medway voted for that on May the 4th, but we've had effectively an unofficial 6th pledge, which is around the reduction in the use of consultants and locums and temporary staff for a couple of reasons. One, it's a better deal for taxpayers if we're not spending out those excessive premiums, but even more importantly than that, and there is more important than finance, the service that those residents receive from permanent staff who are dedicated to Medway is far beyond anything that could be delivered by a temporary member of staff. I'm not saying they don't deliver a good service, of course they do, but if they've got that passion, that commitment, that determination, that will go that extra step, that extra mile. So I think this is an important first step in a practical way of doing it for this really tricky area. And that moves me on to my second point, is that this report, which I wholeheartedly support, will be challenging because of the market of the adult social care market. And again, we don't sit as an island, but it's the right thing to do to say we're proposing some substantial change here. We're making a difference. We're recognising and actually, again, listening carefully. We've talked a lot about the SITFA report. Actually, I'd encourage residents and others to look at that second report from ADAS and the LGA, which again shows actually in some cases for older people, 65 plus, we're below the England average, but we're still at that huge financial pressure. For me, that kind of couple of sentences sums up where we are. We're doing an efficient job and still there's a multi-million-pound overspend. So that's not because of people being profligate with their money, far from it. We're delivering an efficient service, but still the pressure is there. So look, I really support this. And I know this is a step towards that really critical care for Medway offer, which you've been so passionate about since well before May the 4th, and you have the full support, no doubt, of this Cabinet, and I think actually this community when that comes forward. I can see no other hands, so I'm going to go back to Teresa for any closing remarks on this item.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for that support, and thank you to Vince. I do want to say one more thing. At the heart of this, because, you know, people say, oh, it's not all about money. This is about money, actually. It's about what happens when you don't put enough of it into an essential service. But we're also doing things to make sure that that money goes as far as it can. We've got a fantastic public health team here. We've put in lots of preventative activities that are free to everybody. We're targeting people with strength and balance classes to stop them having a fall. We've got a great healthy eating programme. We've got programmes to reduce obesity in childhood. And we're wanting people in Medway to be supported to lead healthy lives and take responsibility for their own health as well. We understand that prevention is better than cure. And so at the heart of this is all of that work going along with our own public health team and in tandem with the NHS as well. So we'll see, I hope, a happier, healthier, more secure population as a result of doing this, who can feel like they will be looked after if they need it, and they will be helped and supported to keep well as they go along life's journey. So, you know, that might sound a bit fluffy, but we're very sincere about it. This is what we want for people in Medway. And as Vince said, we're not overspenders here. The spending on adult social care, the spending on older people has not been as high as other places in the country, even with that compelling demand. It's about the fact that to meet that demand, there just hasn't been enough money coming in. So we've got to restore us to a place where we can be the best that we can be and save money in the long run. And that's why I'm looking forward, I hope, to a Labour government who will do that. We heard that at the weekend from Andrew Gwynn, the Shadow Minister for Social Care. Everybody wants to have longer budgeting periods instead of this lurching from 1 year settlement to another, not being able to see the results in the budget of the strategies that we take to invest to save, and not being able to show that those strategies actually do save money and make things more efficient, because we're always lurching into the next year trying to make things balance. The only bit of public services that are expected to do that, and I include in that the NHS. The NHS can run a deficit if they need to make things happen. We're not allowed to do that, and that's ridiculous, actually.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Are those recommendations agreed? Thank you very much. Let's move on then to item 11, parking charges at country parks. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. And really carrying on from the comments that Teresa has just been making about the adult social care and what that means. This is one of these really difficult choices that we've had to make as a council as a consequence, a direct consequence of not having the kind of funding that we should have to pay for the basic things. I mean, we all know that during COVID, how important our green spaces were to us. Those 20-minute walks that we all took, that's what we were allowed to do. Well, that was on our green spaces. And we've had to cut the budget for that. We've had to cut it severely this year. And rightly so, I get that, because of the way that things like adult and children's social care have to take precedence. But we shouldn't be forced into these decisions by a government that's just literally thought that they don't really mind what we lose out at local government level, and you've heard a lot of comments on that. So what we're looking at here is about introducing charges to our 2 country parks. And everyone knows that Capstan is slightly better than Riverside. I don't know why that is, but it is. But we have 2 brilliant country parks, and they're really popular. I mean, over 300,000 visitors a year to each one. But they do cost money to maintain, and that money currently is now being cut. So we're looking at alternative sources of income. Kent County Council have been charging for a number of years at their country parks, and so we're looking to do the same, introducing a flat £2.50 fee for every visit in a car. But if you visit on a regular basis, dog walkers and the like, then it's a £60 annual fee for those people who want to do that, paying by card, cash or Ringo. And we're looking also at Deangate. Deangate is the subject to a planning application at the moment, the old golf course there. That goes to planning tomorrow evening, and hoping that goes through planning tomorrow night, then that will be a 3rd site that we'll be looking at charging as well as that comes forward, and once we have the money in place to bring that forward, obviously. The funding that we generate from this charge will be fed back, the net income from it will be fed back into the green space management. Medway Council owns around about 2,000 hectares of green space, and we manage and maintain that as best as we can for public use, but it's very expensive and it's very difficult to do with the limited budgets we've got. So the net income from this charge will go back into our green spaces. The fees will start in August this year, and we're also going to parallel this. We're looking at being very careful about how we maintain our access. That's one of the pledges we made at the start of our election campaign, was about green spaces and access to green spaces. We have now brought forward our walking and cycling infrastructure plan. The consultation is underway at the moment, and that will include access to all our green spaces. That's part and parcel of that new plan, that infrastructure plan for walking and cycling. And we're also doing a fundamental review of our public transport. Currently, the 2 country parks we have don't have a bus service, but they will. And we're bringing that forward. So there is parallel work going on to make sure that the people of Medway have access to their green spaces as best as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Any member? Teresa?
Again, Simon. Real skin in the game on this one, because as you know, you used to be one of our rangers, and you've got lifelong commitment to our country parks and to all of our parks, actually, through your work that you've done with the Friends groups, who of course will continue. This is another heavy heart, determined head decision, isn't it? You know, we don't want people to have to pay for country parks if we could possibly help it, but we don't want the parks to fall into disrepair and not be a place where people can go and where our environment is protected. So in bringing this forward, I'm pleased to see that there are concessions for disabled people, that there is the possibility of buying a season ticket, that we've been really careful about the costs for coaches coming along and kept that at a reasonable state so that school parties and other people can still enjoy our green paces. And of course, we've got our ambitions to create small urban parks around Medway, which we're still working on and still considering. So I thank you for bringing this forward. I'm looking forward to Arriva helping us make a contribution to both to the environment and to getting people along to the parks. They don't have to bring a car. And with our active travel, the walking and cycling is important too. So another difficult decision, but one that we're actually prepared to make, instead of just letting it run on, knowing that something needs to be done. So I do commend you to this, and absolutely I support you. And I understand that for some people this is going to come as a shock and something that they weren't expecting. But in order to keep those lovely parks going, it's something that we've got to do.
Thank you, Teresa. I can't see anybody else indicating, so before I come back to you, Simon, a couple of bits with this. Firstly, absolutely right to get Arriva, who are our majority bus provider here. They provide more than 90% of our buses across Medway. But the fact that neither of our current existing country parks has a bus service of any meaningfulness is unacceptable. And actually, this is a great way to get that conversation going. We need more people on public transport, and it needs to be going to the places that people want to go to, and people want to go to our country parks. As Teresa says, and you said in your opening remarks, that others have been charging for country park parking for some considerable time. That doesn't make this any easier, but what it does do is there is a parity now across the whole county of Kent, but that doesn't make this decision easier. But it's the right thing to do. A lot of the decisions we're taking, both in this item and, of course, in item 14 more generally, nobody wants to take any of those decisions, truth be told. But when you've had that 91% cut in your revenue support grant, you are left with no other option. The other option is handing the keys back to DLUC, and we don't want to do that. People of Medway didn't vote for that on May the 4th. So I know this would be personally difficult for you because of your passion, as Teresa says, your passion, commitment, determination, your professional background. But you've got my full support, our collective full support for this difficult decision, as I know the people of Medway will understand when we come to this being part of that wider budget we'll discuss later on. Simon, back to you.
Yeah, thanks very much for support from colleagues on this. Obviously, it's a difficult decision, and a huge thanks to the Green Space Development team who put so much in the support they've had from senior management on this. It's been really good piece of work. They've looked at the figures really carefully and come up with best accounts. So I just put forward the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed? Thank you, colleagues. Let's move on to item 13, HRA, Housing Revenue Account, Capital Revenue Budgets 24. Item 12. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Innovation Park Medway update. I think Simon first and then Lauren to follow. So Simon first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. Just finding the right page on my notes here. Okay, just to recap briefly for members, obviously Innovation Park Medway was a scheme that came forward just before 2019, really, when it was first sort of brought into sort of thing. It's a legacy project, I think of it in those terms, that the previous administration were responsible for bringing forward. 2 areas of land, the northern and southern sites, looking at sort of innovative job creation schemes, businesses moving in from outside of the Medway area in order to boost our economy locally, if you like. And in many respects, there has been some serious problems here, which we've had to look at. And I'm really grateful. I'm going to really, from the start, the officers have been brilliant on this one. They've worked incredibly hard to put together, to go through all the details of where the project is at the moment, where things could have been done better, that kind of thing. And we're at that stage now where we've got a very good, comprehensive understanding of the issues there. We know that the times have changed, and I think my colleague, Councillor Edwards, will go into a bit more detail about the economic side of it. But from the practical development side of the project, we're saying let's just pause it for the moment. Let's review and revise. We're going to asking for 200,000 environment from Capital Fund towards the IPM budget to undertake this review using the right expertise, bringing that in as much as we can, looking at the sites and basically tying the future development of it into our local plan, which is emerging at the moment, but notwithstanding the fact that there are a number of works on the site which have to continue for the next few months. So we've got those ongoing at the moment, the various sort of basic works, the road infrastructure, the drainage, the landscaping, the lighting, all those aspects of it that still need to be part and parcel of any innovative project like this. Those will continue until they're complete, and then we're going to have a look at how we then define the sustainable future of a site of this nature. So I'll stop there and let my colleague, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. Lauren?
Thanks, Vince. I think getting to grips with IPM has been a day one priority for the new administration, and I'd also like to thank the officers who've worked really closely with us since May on this. The reality, though, is that the business case on IPM no longer holds up, particularly due to the ongoing impact of the disastrous Liz Truss budget, which sent interest rates through the roof, and there is, of course, the ongoing challenge of high inflation. And there have also been a lot of changes to working patterns after the pandemic that also supports the argument for a rethink. And I'm afraid the optimistic build it and they will come approach of the last administration hasn't worked. Businesses haven't come in the way they needed to make IPM a success. And where only a couple of businesses have been interested, it has been on the basis that the council took on risks, both financial and operational, that we simply aren't able to support, particularly in the current climate of local government finance. And I also consider it unfortunate that one of the big incentives for businesses to move to IPM, a discount on business rates, expired a couple of years ago. So I think this pause and relatively small expenditure to consider our options in the current market environment is both sensible and prudent. We don't want to continue to expend money on a project where there are significant red flags that we shouldn't ignore. So what we will be looking at is how we can achieve the aims of the project, so economic growth and creating high-value jobs, through other means, and as Simon said, more sustainable delivery models. And this means that existing work that has taken place to build the infrastructure at the sites won't be wasted. Now, this may involve a partnership model, such as a joint venture, amongst the other options that are discussed in the Cabinet paper that will be assessed and considered. In my view, regeneration works best when there is buy-in from businesses and organisations from across Medway, and that means that we'll be looking to work much more closely than the previous administration with neighbouring businesses and the colleges and universities that we have here in Medway to make sure that we have the best chance of making the IPM site a success. And I will be working closely with officers to develop an inward investment strategy this year, which the Council hasn't had for some time, because what we need and what IPM lacked under the last Conservative administration was enough focus on bringing dynamic businesses here to Medway, as well as providing space for local companies to grow, which we are obviously also committed to. So I just want to reassure residents that we will continue to focus on driving economic growth, creating a supportive business environment, and creating decent jobs for local people. And that this pause and reconsideration of our options will mean that IPM has a much better chance of success in future.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Lauren. Nashaba.
Thank you, Vince. And I just want to thank both Simon and Lauren for all their work on this, because it's certainly been a project that has required a lot of scrutiny and a lot of work and a lot of reviewing. But actually, I feel the confidence in what Lauren has just said there around how we can look to take this project forward. One of the things that I've seen in some of the newspaper reports that have been recently published from, and particularly quotes from opposition members suggesting that, you know, we are doing Medway a disservice by reviewing this and not having those opportunities for growth is completely wrong, because when you look at what was being put forward originally, it failed to have that strategic approach that is really needed for a site of this nature. And when you look at other areas where sites of this nature and projects of this nature have worked, they have been about those partnerships, and that's why I'm really pleased that that's something that both Simon and Lauren are going to be pushing and pursuing. How do we work with our neighbours? How do we work with others that are already operating here in Medway? And how do we use that to the best of our advantage? I think that's going to be a core underlying factor of this. And for example, when I look at places like Stevenage, where they have GlaxoSmithKline, that they work really closely in partnership with in order to deliver an IPM style of provision, that's how they've delivered it. And I think we need to learn some of those lessons. And so this is absolutely the right thing to do. And I just want to put that on the record and support my colleagues here tonight.
Thank you very much, Nashaba. Teresa and Chris.
Yes, I mean, thank you to Simon and Lauren and to the officers who've worked with us all, actually, to give a full and frank appraisal of what has actually happened. You know, I think this is an example of the previous administration just having one idea and sticking with it in circumstances that were obviously going to change. COVID did change lots of things, And instead of thinking about how those changes would impact this site, they simply sat back on their sort of haunches and said, well, we've had difficulties because of COVID. Actually, in any project like this, keeping your eye, as I know you, Simon and Lauren, are actually doing, on what is happening outside is incredibly important. You know, since this project was conceived, there have been huge changes in with AI, for example, massive differences in the way big pharma works, huge advances in medical science, in medicines themselves, and all of those kinds of things actually are businesses that perhaps wouldn't have come to IPM when it was first conceived, but might now, under a different incarnation, with that ability to work with partners who want to actually see these new developments come to fruition. So it's absolutely the right thing. It's a bold and determined step to take a pause, to think about where we are now, look at the modern context, think about things like assistive technology in care, for example, which, you know, will help us do some of the other things that we want to do, and to join with other people who can bring these new ideas forward. I'm afraid opposition members going in the paper sort of bleating about, oh, I was hoping Netflix were going to come there. That's exactly what they were doing, hoping. A triumph, in the case of Councillor Perfect, who said that, of hope over experience, I'm afraid. You know, this is something that needs looking at seriously with people who know what they're doing, not someone who wants to throw daft ideas around and think about what might have been. This is about now.
Thank you, Teresa. Tris?
Yes, thank you, Vince. And I just want to echo the sentiment of colleagues across the desk this evening. I think anyone driving past this over the last couple of years could see that things were delayed, I think in the newspaper, the original idea was more than 24 tenants were supposed to be interested, and there was supposed to be significant demand looking back in previous cabinet papers, and that just simply hasn't materialised. And at what point do you decide to take a pause, breathe and reflect on how we've got to this point and where do we move going forward? And I think now is that time. And I think actually some of the commentary in the newspaper last week, I know they brought Alan Jarrett was sort of wheeled out and spoke again very highly of it, but even some of his colleagues in the newspaper article were squabbling with him about reservations. The current deputy leader of the opposition mentioned that they had reservations. It would have been really helpful if they could, if that was expressed at the time, because actually we have spent significant sums of money on this project now. I think what needs to happen is that this report needs to come back with a series of options from a professional perspective about whether there is a demand for commercial real estate in this perspective that was originally envisioned due to technological changes, due to the post-COVID landscape that we're living in. And I think there needs to be other options potentially looked at as well in terms of that location, because at this present moment in time, just sinking ever larger sums of money into something in the hope that advertising will work, I'm afraid, hasn't materialised. And I think we have given it sufficient time now as a new administration coming in, seeing where this is and the direction of travel, for a pause. And I'm hopeful this report will come back and give us some a steer in terms of future direction for this site. So I support my colleagues. As a Rochester councillor myself and resident in that location, I think this has been a topic of conversation for many residents for many years about what isn't happening up there, as well as the inconvenience of the roadworks which have been taking place, amongst other things. So I think there will be some disappointment in the community that the previous administration has allowed this to fester and not deliver upon their pledges and promises. But ultimately, we now need to move forward with this. Millions of pounds of public money has been spent. That will need to be justified by those people who spent it at the time. But going forward, we have that responsible stewardship of the public purse. And it's now time to pause, reflect, and see what our options are on this site going forward. So I support my colleagues and their positions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tris. Before I go back to Simon, I want to say a couple of bits from my perspective. Firstly, I know Simon, and in particular Lauren, has spent huge amounts of hours, not just on this project, but speaking to the businesses who, frankly, should have been part of the conversation for the last decade. And time again, I've heard it with my own ears. were questioning why that wasn't the case and are really pleased they are now. The individuals who were sat in those chairs at the time will need to reflect upon that. And we've been very open and transparent. You know, let's not forget, back in December 2020, in opposition, we proposed very transparent, regular reporting to Cabinet, to scrutiny, to full council of this project. The previous administration voted that down. What were they trying to hide at the time? Maybe they were trying to hide the fact that the Kevin Costner quote doesn't cut it. That's the reality of it, and we're seeing that now. So I'm hugely grateful for officers, and again, particularly Lauren and Simon, who have done some really hard graft to get to where we are today. I look forward to seeing what those individuals say moving forwards. I think it's right that we take that breather and look carefully at what the options are. There are a number of options. I suspect if you stopped a dozen people in Rochester High Street or on the Davis estate or wherever it might be, they'd have different views as to what that might look like. We want to hear from residents, but we want to hear from experts as well. I'm certainly never afraid to hear from an expert. I think that's a good thing to do. So thank you both for your work on this. And again, we will obviously keep residents and the wider council informed as we move forward. Simon, back to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Richard. And thank you very much, colleagues, for your support on this. It's a difficult decision, and it's a tough job we've got ahead of us. And you've heard comments about how, you know, the reflection on the past, the amount of public money spent already on this project. And that's one of the fundamental rules of local government. We as councillors are responsible for the public purse in Medway, and we need to make sure we do that sensibly. We have to provide quality and value for money for the community. And that's what this is about, really. This is about us stopping and reflecting on how we can do that. And what's more exciting really about this is this opportunity to look to the future. I mean, Lauren just mentioned about how this partnership working is key to making this happen. And that's what we do as Labour. We work in partnership with the community, with the businesses around here, and we're going to bring new businesses in if we possibly can as well into this project. But we need to have that moment to reflect and work at that. And one of the fundamental things that I'm absolutely passionate about, as my colleagues know, is sustainability. This has to be sustainable. We need to see something happening here in 50 years' time, providing jobs and support for the community. And the fundamentals of sustainability are about economy, about the environment, and about the community. And we need to make sure that those are in place. And that's what we're doing. Thank you very much. I've put the recommendation forward as laid out on page 305.
Thank you very much, Simon. Is those recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Let's then move on now to the HRA Capital and Revenue Budgets 24-25. And Sharpa, over to you.
Thank you. So this report presents the Housing Revenue Account Capital and Revenue Budgets for 24-25, provides details of proposed rent and service charge levels for that period, and also sets out revised forecasts for the HRA business plan, which is for a period of 30 years. Just for the benefit of anybody listening, the HRA is ring-fence funding, which sits within our general fund that is used for the purposes of council housing stock and services that are related to it. So it sits in that separate section. I think a couple of things just to highlight about the report. First of all, with reference to the affordable rent and social rent increases at 7.7%, this is in line with national, obviously in line with what has been set nationally at the cap level. And, you know, we recognise it's a challenging time for our residents and for council tenants at the moment, just like it is for everybody across our communities, and specifically when it comes to rent. However, we are in a position because of what we've seen with inflation, what we've seen with that trust budget, which has essentially put a nail in the coffin of our economy to an extent. We are having to look at all options that are available to us, and unfortunately this is something that we will have to do in terms of increasing our rents. Obviously the support is there for residents should they require it, should they have any issues and the potential to fall into arrears. And just to also flag that we are in a 53-week year this time round, and there will be 1 week which will be rent-free as part of that. So I just wanted to flag that. I think in terms of the HRA business plan, again, we've got huge housing challenges in our country, and it's something that I've talked about a lot at both Cabinet, full council, and in other arenas, because it's something I'm really, really passionate about, is how do we challenge and how do we tackle that specifically in Medway, because as I've often said, housing is a fundamental right. There are things within the HRA business plan that we are looking to do, which will help us and enable us to do that. And certainly we talked at the previous council meeting about our plans to deal with the challenges we face in temporary accommodation around purchasing 150 new council properties in order to support our temporary accommodation needs, as well as 150 leases, and that's been captured within this, and it's important to recognise that we are looking for innovative solutions. That said, there are still those inflationary pressures that we're facing, and the HRA business plan recognises that, because it is a 30-year-old plan, as I said, and look forward, and given some of the changes that we've seen in the market, that has had to be reflected in this as well. Really happy to take any questions, but hopefully it's quite straightforward in terms of what we've set out.
Thank you very much, Nshaba. Any colleague? I think I'd say a couple of things on this before coming back to you for closing remarks. Firstly, it is right that it is us as a council who decides the rate we're putting this up year on year. I was pretty frustrated when government chose to intervene and force rules upon us and every other council that has an HRA account. So it's good that they're not interfering. I wish they would get in touch about perhaps some other things we're awaiting some responses on. Secondly, look, I think this clearly shows, as part of that wider housing piece since May the 4th, the fantastic leadership you've taken. And it's about actually taking the whole community on the journey. So I want to pay tribute to you and the housing team for the fantastic, innovative approach that was taken at Spotlights Theatre. Looking at our housing strategy there, not in a kind of stuffy meeting room, but with some legislative theatre, which is quite difficult for me to say. But it was a theatre full of people who had an interest, had a passion, a determination to play their part in setting the housing policy for our community moving forward. That is an open, transparent, cooperative council. We're ready to do business with everybody. We want everybody to be part of that conversation, and that comes through your leadership and the excellent officers we have working in this particular area. So I'm happy to support this. This was, again, I do recognise this is a challenging increase for individual households. I hope we see the extension of things like the Household Support Fund, because that, again, I know has led to some specific support for communities and individuals where there have been challenges around rent, utility bills, etc. So if there's nobody else, I'll come back to you, Nshaba, for any final comments.
I don't think there's anything further for me other than just to say thank you for your support, and thank you for also recognising some of the work that we're doing in terms of innovation around looking at how we bring forward ways of tackling the housing crisis, specifically in Medway. And just to say that, of course, one of the things I'm really aware of is that when it comes to housing, both in the private rented sector, council tenants and the wider kind of market, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to this, and so that's why we've got to look at all aspects of it. There's a lot of moving parts. The HRA and what we can deliver through that offers us some opportunities to do that, but there is a wider piece that we need to look at as well. But in terms of what we've got here today, hopefully colleagues can see how we're looking to bring some of that forward through the HRA.
Thank you very much, Nshaba. Is that agreed? Thank you, colleagues. That moves us on to item 14, the proposed capital and revenue budget for 24-25. You'll be pleased to know I don't intend to give the speech I will give on the 29th of February, so it means you'll get home before midnight tonight. But I do want to say a few things before we move to open the conversation. We knew on May the 4th this process that we're going forward with now would be incredibly challenging. We knew that because we knew the 91% cut in revenue support grant. That figure comes from a question answered by the former leader to our colleague Joe Howcroft-Scott. So very, very clear that was the backdrop that we were inheriting. We knew that last year's budget was built on reserves and then supplemented by reserves, the level of which we subsequently found out could not have been matched this year because the reserves were not at that level at the start of this financial year. And we knew as well that inflationary pressures because of Liz Truss's economic disaster were going to add additional pressures onto lots of our contractual increases that we see year on year. So we knew it would be tough. We knew it would be difficult. So having gone through that process as a cabinet and corporate management team, a team of 25, looking at this carefully, not one individual, not the leader, sat on the 5th floor, perhaps talking to one or two individuals. We're a collaborative organisation, and we work collectively, and I'm proud of that, and I thank every individual who's played their part and where we've got to today. We also brought in SIPFA. We didn't have to do that. We could have gone, no, we don't believe in experts. We're just going to crack on with this ourselves. That's not the case. We did the right thing by bringing in SIPFA. I thank them for their work. I thank officers and individuals who were part of that process. That is a difficult read. Any document, anything that starts with the sentence, Medway's finances are in a grave situation, is not something I want to be looking at, but it's a realistic, honest assessment of where we are, which is what leads us to the decisions that this proposed capital and revenue budget bring forward here tonight, which of course will go on to February the 29th. And let me just say something else before I go into some of the detail. In previous years, the former leader of the council would have magically pulled out rabbits of the hats, often, perhaps even without speaking to sometimes anybody about those rabbits coming out of the hat. We're not going to do that. In good times or bad, the budget we take forward, unless there are technical reasons why amendments need to be made, there are no magic hats with rabbits. We want to do a professional job. We want to be transparent and open. We want people to have that scrutiny, which has happened. Scrutiny have been able to look at as much as they've been able to look at that time, and that is a challenging job. I know, having sat in those chairs for the previous 15 years, trying to scrutinise effectively a half-completed budget at that time, and that's not the fault of officers, that's not the fault of the administration, that's not the fault of the scrutiny teams, but they do the job as best as they can in those circumstances. And again, as has been documented elsewhere, we also took the decision this year to speak to the citizens panel and ask them some of their views and opinions as well, and I thank them for those that have come forward. So where does that leave us? I want to pick up on a few things tonight, and as I say, we'll leave most of my contribution actually to this to February the 29th. I want to address directly the issue of pay. This council has had a flawed pay system. We believe potentially discriminatory pay system. We've said that elsewhere. At least 3 of us around this table have been former opposition spokes on employment matters. Some of us have worked for trade unions. I think we know this system of pay is not fit for purpose. We need to fix it. That can't be done for free. So I have no hesitation in making sure that we, if nothing else, make ourselves less liable to any potential employment tribunals or equal pay claims. I don't want that to happen in an administration I'm part of. And that therefore means we have to put some resource into that. That's the right thing to do. And I thank colleagues on the Employment Matters Committee for looking carefully both at that and the cost of living increase as well, which is proposed here. And again, I respect trade unions. I respect HR professionals. I'm not going to undermine them all just by coming up with something on the night. That's disrespectful to every individual involved in that process. That's not how we do things under a Labour and cooperative administration. I said already I want to recognise SIPFA's work, and it's important to recognise their recommendations. They've effectively come forward and said we cannot create a credible, balanced budget if we don't get support from central government. So we did the right thing to do. We contacted central government with the 2 recommendations. And again, we didn't have to publish the SIPFA report. We chose to do that because we want to be open and transparent with everybody, the residents of Medway, the wider community and elsewhere. We know one of those 2 options has been ruled out, and has been ruled out effectively for all councils across the country, bar 4. Those names are well documented elsewhere. We're still awaiting to hear whether we will be successful in the support from central government for the second element. Again, we are not the only council across the country seeking that support. My understanding is there are councils of all political persuasions who are seeking that support. And is it any wonder, you know, when, again, we've had 91% cut in revenue support grant here, similar figures up and down the country, the LGA being very clear in their kind of research with both council leaders and chief executives, that a huge percentage, more than 20% of councils at risk of effective bankruptcy and serving a Section 114 notice. Those 2 things are different for the avoidance of doubt, just to be very, very clear. So that's what led us to this situation we find ourselves in tonight. There are a number of painful decisions that we're having to take as a council, not ones we take lightly, and colleagues may talk about those tonight. In particular, I think Councillor Marhill may make an intervention around swimming. Lots of people, since we made our publication of this last Monday, have raised that as an issue, and I absolutely understand why they would, and I know we'll give some further update on that this evening. There will be others as well. There'll be other decisions that we're having to propose, which we as individual residents, Medway is all of our homes as a cabinet. None of these things are things we want to do. We didn't get into local government politics to decide what is the least worst painful option of cuts. But with that backdrop that we have, it is a responsible thing to do. We have to be fiscally responsible. And even if we do get that support from government, and I hope we do, that doesn't mean that we don't still have to take difficult decisions. That support will give us some political and financial headroom collectively to try and make some of those changes that we want to see. We've had, I would call, some warm words. If you look at paragraph 7.3, they've confirmed receipt, they've confirmed that they are looking to support councils to set a balanced budget for 24-25. Well, bluntly, it's in their hands. We've given them the roadmap which is clear from the SIPFA document. We are determined to make that happen. That will mean more difficult decisions for us, almost certainly, but actually that's the right thing to do, because the alternative, like I say, is handing over the keys to Michael Gove and some inspectors, which is not what anyone voted for on May the 4th. So we will bring forward this budget. We're still waiting some final clarification as to when we might hear. That may have an impact on the meeting, what happens at February the 29th. We're waiting for some clarity on that, and we will update everybody as soon as practically possible. But those things are out of our hands. We've done everything we can to get to where we've got to today. And on that basis, I'm proud, with a heavy heart, to be moving the recommendations that we'll put forward to Council on February the 29th. I'll pause at that point and see if any colleagues want to come in. Teresa first, and then I'll come to Harinder and Zoe.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. And, I think it's important to thank all of the officers for their forbearance when we had SIPFA working here. That meant more work for all of you. It meant very close scrutiny of your work, as well as the legacy that we inherited from the previous administration, but it was a worthwhile process. We took part in that willingly. We were completely transparent. The report is now in the public domain. And as you've said, Vince, there's some comfort in it. SIPFA recognised how hard our staff were working. They recognised how denuded some of the divisions were of staff. They recognised the statutory obligations. And indeed, they recommended to us the actions that we have taken. So I feel that everybody has done everything they possibly can in the best of faith. I just wanted to draw attention to some of the recommendations in the budget. And of course, it's important to say as well, we started this process as soon as we took over the administration. We didn't wait. So when I was talking earlier about the revenue budget monitoring of the budget we inherited, all of these things were writ large there. We could see that reserves had been plundered, easy options had been taken, difficult decisions had been avoided. That was clear from the beginning. And here we are now addressing all of those things. And one of the things that this budget is addressing, one of the assumptions that we've made, is that this is the time to improve staff salaries. Because if we don't, we'll continue being reliant on agencies. I don't want public money to go into the pockets of people that run agencies. That's up to them, how they run their business. I want public money to be directed at public services, and I want public service workers to have long-term security, to be rewarded properly for their efforts, to have good conditions of service and the comfort of a proper pension scheme. So we've taken a decision in looking into the teeth of this absolute crisis that is an important thing to do, to send a message that we recognise what has happened before, we recognise the consequences of those actions that were taken in the past, and even in this difficult circumstance, we want to address them. So I take no lessons or intend to listen at all to anybody who says, has already been said in our Employment Matters Committee and elsewhere, that somehow the staff don't deserve to get a pay rise. That's absolutely the last thing you would do. It's the first thing you do if you're serious about maintaining a workforce who can help us deliver the assumptions in some of these budgets, who have gone into hand-to-hand combat in their divisions to make sure that these proposals came forward. They do deserve to be rewarded properly. We want to be an employer of choice, and it's critical that we make that decision as part of the rest of the difficult decisions that we're making now. It's very easy to put aside the concerns and the welfare of the people that work for you and decide that, you know, somehow that doesn't matter because we're in a crisis. We haven't done that, and I do, you know, commend everybody for supporting that and coming forward. And actually, you know, I want to thank SIPFA and I want to thank the LGA for Partners in Care. If they, you know, the things that they did gave us reassurance that we are gripped, that we know what's happening, that we understand what needs to be done to get the council building back better. And it was a process that, whilst, you know, new to all of us, new to the officers, difficult, another thing to do, actually brought us to where we are. And of course, it's worth remembering that the government used SIPFA to bring into these councils who are not doing what we did, trying to get ahead of the problems that we've got. So actually, we have done that ourselves. We've done their work for them. And I think as such, we deserve to be commended for that and to get the assistance and support that we need.
Thank you, Teresa. Harinder.
Thank you, Vince. I'd like to say no resident, no councillor, no one would want to take the kinds of decisions that we're taking, that we're having to take. But to be in that position, we're going to need at least two things. We need a national government that supports local government and doesn't just treat it as a crutch to prop up its own economic mismanagement. That's for a start. And then secondly, we need a local government leadership that takes the right decisions at the right time and not afraid to take them. And we haven't had that in Medway from previous administrations. So, which is why, you know, we are where we are. And I've been contacted by residents about a great number of issues, like Vince, you've mentioned one, but also about the proposed closure of the Rochester Art Gallery. And each and every one of them is right. I agree with every single email that I've received on that topic, and I don't mind saying that. And, you know, we receive lots of emails, we agree with some, we don't agree with all, but in this case, I can genuinely say that I agree with every single point that they've made. And I have to say it's been a really, really difficult decision. I don't underestimate the importance of creativity, of our creative community. That's to say nothing of the economic benefits that the creative industry bring. And I was talking about Netflix before it was cool, bringing them into Medway. Haven't got that yet, but we're working on it. And that's to also not talk about the platform and the support that the space that a gallery has provided to many over the years. So I want to take this time to say that we are looking at alternative ways for providing visual arts and creative provision. So we are looking at that, but it might sit outside of the current physical location and continue to support creativity across Medway. And then again in the future, looking for other suitable spaces, permanent or otherwise. So we've heard what residents have to say, and we will be looking at alternatives that we can provide in the near future. Likewise, when it comes to the provision for swimming and associated concessions, look, we're in a situation now where councils are letting go of their swimming provision altogether, right? That's not the case here. I think it's something like 400 have closed across the UK since 2010. But here in Medway, we recognise the importance of teaching children and young people to swim, and we'll do whatever we need to do to defend that provision. So that's why, in addition to our really well-attended swimming lessons programme, we're keen to build on our family swimming offer in particular, which is why each sports centre will be developing timetables supporting it. including additional concessions for children and young people being able to swim for as little as £1 when accompanied by a fee-paying adult. And we'll be looking to develop this in time for the Easter holiday period. So we are keeping on top of our priorities, but we'll be taking the decisions that we need to ultimately to protect our services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harinder. Zoe?
Yes, I'd like to welcome the Employment Matters proposals to full council for the 5% cost of living allowance for staff. In more favourable circumstances, it will probably be greater, but it's a good start, and it will ensure that we don't have to continue appointing eye-wateringly expensive locums to fill the gaps because we can't recruit staff substantively to the organisation and therefore to maintain continuity within the workforce.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Tristan?
Yes, thank you, Vince. And I again want to echo colleagues' sentiments on this. After 23 years of a former Conservative administration and 14 years of Conservatives in government, I'm afraid all councils, irrespective of their political complexion, are facing the headwinds of increasing costs in statutory services, adult social care and children's services, which they've also faced the inflationary sting of the Trust mini-budget, which has had significant impacts across our economy, including cost of living issues for residents, from mortgages to food price rises. And those headwinds are filtering through all of those services that we commission and engage with. And lastly, a government that has taken their eye off the ball when it comes to supporting local government. From many councils across the country have had to face these very, very difficult decisions. And I think most of our residents, if not all of them, understand that we're in that difficult position because of what has happened in national government. They can see the news, they can read the newspapers, they can see that over 40 MPs of varying colours and constitution have written to the government to say that their councils, again of varying colours and constitutions, are facing economic difficulty. We are not unique in having approached government in relation to the two proposals that we put on the table, and we followed independent guidance on that, and ultimately they are the sector experts in accountancy and even the body the government would go to themselves to gain access. And I want to salute all of the work that officers have done with SIPFA and across all the divisions to try and identify ways in which we can manage our position. These are going to be difficult times. Over the next 2 years, we have a journey to take residents on from a situation where there were some poor decisions. And I will use an example of this, the free Monday parking. That was a very popular decision for an election. However, when a budget didn't add up, when you knew that you had huge issues going into that, that was an irresponsible decision made at the time because of our current financial position. So we had to make very difficult calls, and some of these decisions that my colleagues have made across this chamber are not ones that we were elected to do, in the sense that we didn't want to come in and do this, but we have been forced into that position. And over the next 2 years, we want to take residents on that journey of improvement so that after 2 years, we are in a much more fiscally better position. And I just point to other local authorities in the region, specifically Brighton, where they also had similar problems in the past with a previous administration, and they've steered that council into a better direction. And so it can be done. There are very difficult times ahead, and we want to take people with us in a transparent and open way. But what can't be allowed is what you've just said, rabbits out of the hat, proposals that were considered for election purposes, and also big programmes of work that were not scrutinised, as we've seen earlier on in the agenda. And I'm hopeful that whilst this budget will be difficult, and we all have to face that situation, that all of us will know that we face this together as a collective body, as an administration, as a group of councillors. We'll step forward and we'll take people on that journey with us. And I'm hopeful in the next 2 or 3 years we will be in a much more firmer financial footing as a result. Thank you.
Thank you, Tris. Nashaba, then Lauren. Lauren, please, go ahead.
Thanks, Vince. I just wanted to highlight really the seriousness of the financial situation that we're in, because I'm very conscious that particularly the Leader of the Opposition in previous comments has highlighted that, we go through this process every year, there's an overspend and we get it down. And I specifically want to just direct people to the SIPFA report, which is sort of critical of that approach and says, look, this has led to an overly optimistic view of what can be achieved. But they go on to say that there now seems to be, thankfully, amongst officers, a much greater awareness and understanding of the seriousness of the situation that Medway is in. And I would also add to that the seriousness that a lot of local councils are in. It's not Medway specific. Local government is on its knees because of the lack of central government financing. And I just call on the Leader of the Opposition to understand that, to pick up a newspaper and see how many councils are going through exactly the same thing that we are, because a lot of people seem to understand the challenges that we're facing, and I think we're facing very well, working very well with officers to try and deliver a balanced budget against very difficult constraints. And I just hope that everyone else seems to understand the problem, and I would call on the opposition to understand the problem as well, and really look at what we're achieving here in some very difficult circumstances.
Thank you very much indeed, Lauren. Nashaba, are you happy? Okay, thank you. If there's nobody else, look, thank you to all colleagues for your powerful contributions tonight. Every word heard carefully by all of us, and importantly, the residents we represent. If people haven't read the SIPFA report, read it, understand it, and recognise that's why we're taking the decisions we will be taking on February the 29th, not because we want to, far from it. I'd much rather have a decent night's sleep, which frankly, with these pressures can be difficult sometimes, but the reality is this. We were elected on May the 4th to get on and deliver a council. We're doing that every single day. Some of the stuff we've brought forward has been really inspiring and revolutionary in some cases. But the backdrop to all of that is this report, is the report that we see now, which is ultimately central government have starved Medway of funding, 91% cut in our revenue support grant. And of course, it's not just a revenue support grant. I talk about that a lot because it's important, but there are other funding streams which have come and gone, have been pared down, have not kept pace with inflation. And all of those impact on the council services we deliver. I'm grateful to Harinder in particular for highlighting, where people have been, saying stuff on social media, highlighting their concerns, emailing us as councillors, picking up the phone. We're listening. And absolutely, although we're having to take difficult financial decisions, these are not binary choices of absolutely everything or absolutely nothing. We will always try to find a third way, somewhere else in the middle, where if we can get there, we will get there to support our residents. I want to, and I will thank Phil and his team again on the 29th, but I want to thank Phil and his team, recognising, of course, the budget is everyone's responsibility, but ultimately it is Phil, Katie and the rest of that finance team who have done some phenomenal work, as Teresa said, not only in delivering what we've got in front of us, but also that additional work for SIPFA in particular, which is incredibly valuable for us as a council. And I look at paragraph 18 of this report, which is Phil's words, and I recognise every one of those. We don't want to be in a situation where we are below your suggested position for reserves, but if government is telling us spend your reserves, then actually, again, we're almost in a position where if we don't do that, they'll be saying, well, you have to have less than £10 million reserves, which I think is fiscally very challenging, but I recognise where we are with that as well. I want to highlight the citizens panel again, paragraph 20, look at those issues there. And again, that's a snapshot similar. Again, I mentioned social media. Of course, some people have said very critical things, as you would expect, but quite a lot of residents have understood this is not of our making. They've understood this is nearly 14 years of starving of resources from SW1 to the Medway towns and elsewhere. And I thank those residents who are coming on us with that journey, as Tristan says. The final thing I'll finish with tonight is this. Politics is about priorities. We've laid out the really challenging priorities we're taking forward to February the 29th. Central government has priorities too. They prioritised £9 billion, £9 billion for a national insurance cut. They are potentially prioritising £7 billion for an inheritance tax cut. All of local government, according to the LGA, the gap is £4 billion. And I would say if it's a choice between releasing inheritance tax and making sure councils like ours have the resources it needs, I know where my priority would be. Thank you again to colleagues, and we'll move the recommendations. Are those agreed? Thank you. Let's move on to the next item, which is the Risk Strategy Annual Review on page 477. Again, thanks to officers who have been working on this, thanks to others who have commented on this. I think one of the things we will certainly look at this time next year, of course, one of the things we'll be taking forward to our annual council is our One Medway Council plan, and actually making sure that when we get to the risk register for this time next year, that the council plan is relative to the risk register. The council plan sits with us at the moment, obviously not of our making, but we still have to have that as a working document. So when that changes, I think we'll have a much closer look at any potential changes around the risk strategy as laid out in the document there. Any comment from any colleagues on that matter? Simon, please. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Risk strategies are always sort of fairly considered to be quite boring and mundane documents, but actually they carry a huge amount of importance. And I think in this context, you know, we can see that where we look at the risks that we're facing now with our budget situation. What do we cut? Where do we cut? How do we cut? All of that carries risk. So this risk strategy really does matter. But also in the context of that, I just wanted to underline another point, and that's in relation to climate change. One of the issues that we're facing almost sort of on a monthly basis since we took over in May was violent weather systems coming our way in different forms, whether it's trees coming down or whether we've been flooded in different parts of Medway. Flooding events in Medway, which were supposed to happen every sort of 15 years, are now happening every 2 or 3 years. And that's a result directly of climate change and the risks involved of development in the wrong places, of overdevelopment in parts where it shouldn't happen, all that kind of stuff. All that risk element comes in as part of the climate change agenda. So as well as the financial risks and all the other risk factors that are incorporated in this, we're putting climate change risks into the mix as well. So I'd add that in.
Thank you very much. Lauren, please, and Teresa.
Thanks, Vince. Just in a similar vein, obviously, with the previous item around the budget, we're very conscious that as an administration that we need to be better than the previous administration at making sure that any savings are being realised, and we need some really, really close budget monitoring, as I think SIPFA makes clear in its report as well. So I think there's possibly also an opportunity when we review the risk strategy going forward to making sure that's also reflected.
Excellent point. Thank you, Lauren. Teresa.
Yes, I just wanted to agree with Simon. You know, it's very easy to dismiss a risk strategy as something that's a bit tedious and a bit bureaucratic, but actually it's the way that we protect our people, our places and our planet. And those three things are incredibly important. And if we don't understand the implications of the actions that we take and the risks that that creates, then we'd really be in a very poor position indeed. So this has got to be better, it's got to be stronger. And if we want our people, place and planet to be in good shape, this is actually one of the ways that we make sure that happens.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Can't see any other hands. So I agree with all of those comments, and I think in particular, Lauren, your point around making sure that the recommendations and that work is already starting to happen around the additional monitoring. We need to make sure that there's a triangle of that monitoring, this risk assessment this time next year when it's looked at on an annual basis. Of course, we may make changes throughout the year if we need to, and that One Medway Council plan, that those three are working in alignment. That hasn't always been the case with some corporate documents in the past, which is not the fault of officers in my view at all, but we need to make sure from a political perspective we are absolutely aligning those as we move forward. On that basis, are colleagues happy to agree those recommendations? Thank you. Simon next, Local Development Scheme.
Thanks very much. On one level, this again is sort of the boring, mundane. This is a legislative process, but I think there's a more fundamental underlying issue here. Our local plan was adopted in 2003, so it's now 21 years old. I think that's the right maths I'm doing in my head, something like that. Anyway, something along those lines. But certainly, so, and we've needed a new local plan for about 10 years now. And the previous administration consistently failed to deliver on this one. It is a real legacy that they've left a really poor show, to be honest, because what we've been left with is development by planning inquiry, and planning inquiry inspectors' decisions. And we've seen that out at Cliff, we've seen that in the Capstan Valley, we've seen it over in Raynham, all sorts of places where decisions are being made out of our control. We no longer have control over development in Medway at the moment. And in order to stop that, one of the first things we did when we came into the authority in May last year was start the work on producing a proper local plan for Medway. And then right in the middle of start making that decision, the government took away £170 million worth of housing infrastructure fund from us. The infrastructure funding needed to support the housing development, they're expecting us to provide 28.5 million homes for Medway. 28.5 million? Apologies for that. 28,500 homes. I was carried away with my numbers there. Apologies. But basically, that's what's been going on. So we're in this kind of bizarre situation where we're expected to develop without any infrastructure. And that's that sort of signifies how Mr. Gove and his department for levelling up housing and communities seems to operate nowadays. And I'm really putting him on the spot here. We did invite him to come down and talk to us, and he's not here. He's not prepared to do that. He wrote to us in December saying that he wanted us to produce a local plan, but we're already producing one. And we are actually at the stage now where we've gone through a series of processes involved. Regulation 18, which is a public consultation, and we had over 5,000 hits on our website for that, which is really encouraging. People obviously passionate about this in Medway, and they really want to make their voices heard. And we've now produced this timetable, this document, the local development scheme, which really sets out the kind of documents that require the environmental ones, the traffic-related ones, all that kind of stuff, and the timetable for their preparation and the delivery of the local plan, well, hopefully by 2026. And I think one of the things I want to stress in that is that this isn't a sort of one-off thing. This is a collective effort. We've got a brilliant planning team, a very small planning team who've done an amazing job. And thanks to my colleagues, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Khan and Councillor Hubbard, working as a team together, we've been working with the officers on getting this out there. And we're now at that stage where we're having to make a decision as to what that timetable looks like. And we're determined to deliver and to de-risk that process. We've decided that it's a good idea to go back out to a Reg 18 consultation again. It won't slow down the timetable. It just gives the people of Medway another opportunity to look at our plans, look at our ideas, taking on board what they gave us back in October last year when we consulted for the first time with them, and we're looking at it again, and to give them a second chance over a period between June and July this summer in order to do that. So that's a kind of key decision in the process and the timetable of the plan that we're going to go ahead with. And so really I'm asking colleagues just to sort of take this on board and go ahead with the recommendation that we've got here. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. Looking for any member? I can't see any. I'd say a couple of bits on this. Firstly, again, thanks to yourself, Lauren, Nashaba and Stephen for the work you're putting in as our administration's local plan team, working incredibly hard closely with officers to deliver what is a priority for the residents of Medway, not for us necessarily as a cabinet or a council, but I understand entirely the utter frustration. I've been incredibly angry over the last 15 years at some of the planning inspectorate decisions that have been taken against things which I'm fundamentally opposed to. But actually, when the starting point is you have no local plan, you therefore have no 5-year land supply, in lots of cases, that's appeal almost won immediately. So we've got to get on with this. But it is right to have that additional level of consultation. If you look at paragraph 6.3, that makes it very clear the timetable is there. And it is hugely regrettable. You know, I've been on social media, I've seen with interest, we've had 1 or 2 visits from, I think, cabinet members and I think the Home Secretary was here at one point. It's a real shame that perhaps if there's any Conservative members listening, perhaps they could ask CCHQ for Michael Gove to be lined up for a visit. And whilst he's here, and look, go knock on some doors, I'm sure they'll tell you what they think of Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. They certainly did that when we were out. Perhaps he could spare an hour to come and actually see firsthand the brilliant work that the planning team is doing in delivering, despite some of the challenges, not least the economic challenges as was laid out earlier on. He's got another just under a month to come down. He'd be welcome. I'll buy him a cup of coffee. I hope Michael Gove comes and sees firsthand the brilliant work this administration is doing to get on with this plan. And then we'll make sure that Medway has something fit for purpose, not more than 20 years out of date. So, Simon, thank you to you and Nashaba and Lauren and Stephen from a political perspective, but importantly, those offices who I know are working so incredibly hard to get this over the line because they are dedicated individuals who want to make this positive change for Medway. Simon, back to you.
Yep, thank you very much, Vince, and just basically ask members to approve the recommendation as laid out in Appendix 1.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed? Thank you. Back to you, Simon, for item 17. Oh, I think we have a declaration of interest coming.
Sorry for failure to get my declaration in on time. I have to excuse myself because I live in the conservation area.
Thank you. So you'll be out for this item, 17 and 18. You'll be back for alcohol control, just saying. We'll just wait for Harinder to leave. We'll take a 10 seconds pause.
Find the right page.
Harinder's getting another cuppa. I'm very jealous. I could do with one of those. Cup of coffee, just saying. He didn't hear me. Okay, Simon, over to you for item 17.
Thank you very much, Vince. And thank you again to the... Hang on, just finding my page. There we go. Just to thank everyone for this next item. This is the... Sorry? I'm on it. Thank you. This is the Star Hill to Sun Pier Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan. It sounds like a mouthful, but basically it's a document that lays out the extent of the conservation area and really the sort of work that needs to be done to enhance and bring forward all the great ideas that we've got for this area. It's a really incredibly important historic part of Medway. There's a lot of effort gone in to make this work well, and a huge consultation with the local community, and there's the High Street Heritage Action Zone is down here, and that's got some significant government funding behind it. And what we're trying to do here is to really recognise the value of its history and the conservation value that it has, but at the same time, it's an area that really needs some redevelopment. It's right for new businesses to move in there. There's some lovely areas for accommodation. It's right next to the river. It's got some challenges in terms of its traffic problems and stuff like that. So in order to bring all that about, we're producing this conservation area appraisal and management plan. So really, I'm just asking members to approve this, and the next item will continue that process.
Thank you very much, Simon. Teresa, please.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I do want to pay tribute to Adam Bryan, our Director of Place, and to Ross Crayford, the Conservation Officer. And I think I'd encourage everyone that can to have a look at this report, because it's a fantastic appraisal of the people, the different communities, the faith communities, our LGBTQ communities, all the characters who down through the centuries have made a big contribution to this important part of our towns. The report details all of the skills, the retailers that were there, the ship's chandlers, the breweries that were there, and always a very firm commitment from the arts and indeed from the architectural community. The report's got some great photographs in it, and I think we should pay tribute as well to everybody in the community who've worked with the Heritage Action Zone to really make sure that we get this on the map. I think it's a fantastic appraisal of a piece of history that hitherto had been quite neglected. It's opened it up and showed all down through the years the contributions that people have made. So absolutely, I support the extension of this conservation area, and I was very pleased with council colleagues to attend the packed for Intra just a couple of weeks ago, and saw there the enthusiasm from people for really getting involved and making this area another interesting and vibrant feature of our towns.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Can't see any other colleagues at this stage, so I would absolutely endorse everything that Teresa said. It was great to welcome Lord Parkinson to the area, another government minister who isn't Michael Gove, but it was very nice to welcome Lord Parkinson. It was a bit rainy that day, but actually the sun was shining with the individuals, as Teresa rightfully says, those who have made up some of that brilliant cultural consortium, and wider, although it's been called a cultural consortium, it's looked at that whole community piece, and the fact they're moving into a CIC is very welcome. And I'd want to pay very specific tribute actually to Rob Flood, who is an amazing historian, but also can tell some of the most entertaining stories despite it absolutely pelting down with rain. So big thanks to him and all those who have made a big contribution to this area over time. And I think this document will serve not only as a great document and great policy to take forward, but also a good kind of stamp in the ground to say this has been some phenomenal work done by the community there. So, as nobody else, back to you, Simon, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vince. Thank you, colleagues. Just to mention as well, actually, I mean, I was involved in this project from the start, but more recently, Harinder, who's had to leave the room, is very involved in this, obviously, and a number of other colleagues, local councillors, have got very involved in the work that's going on there. So thanks to colleagues for their involvement and engagement with this as well. And I just approve it for recommendation.
Thank you very much. Are those recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on to item 18 on a similar vein. Simon, back to you.
There we go. Yeah, this is really part two of the same issue. It's the Pier, Star Hill to Pier Conservation Area Significance-Led Development Framework Supplementary Planning Document, and that's a real mouthful. And basically, this is the support that we need to put in place from a planning perspective, and it's part of the local plan framework as well. So it feeds into that, and it really is a guide from the planner's point of view as to what kind of development will be allowed to take place within the conservation area. And at this point, I just wanted to reflect upon something that I think is really important, and we're seeing it across other parts of Medway now. There's this idea of co-production, and it's absolutely brilliant way of looking at our community, where we engage with the local community, we talk to them about what they want and what they need, and then we bring in the strategic planners to put that together. And it's a sort of top-down, bottom-up approach that is actually working really well. We've done it here, we've done it in Luton, in my own ward, and we're now looking at doing it. We've done a bit of it in Chatham already with the Chatham design codes, and we're now looking at doing it in Gillingham as well. And this idea of co-production, where we actually engage with the community first, talk to them, get to know them, and as Teresa said, produce this amazing document that tells you the whole story of an area, so we know it intimately, and then we say to the developers, actually, in order to preserve this lovely heritage, but also plan for a sustainable future, this is what we think you need to do. And that's really what this second document's all about. So I'm just asking colleagues to pass the recommendation and formally adopt the Star Hill to Pier Significance-Led Development Framework Supplementary Planning Document.
Thank you, Simon. I think even the acronym for that would probably be too long, probably. There we go. And yeah, absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you. I think we've seen in a number of different documents, different style documents, but the general tenure that whether it's a neighbourhood plan, whether it's a design code, all of those things are adding value, not just to the individual areas, but to that collective of Medway, to make sure our local plan genuinely reflects how people see their community for the next 15 years and beyond. Teresa, please.
I mean, just a quick one. I think it's so important, Simon, as you've alluded to send this strong message to developers about the sort of development that we want, the way we want development to echo the history and the style of the area, and come forward with new ways of representing that. And I think that's a message that actually, without a local plan, has been very difficult to convey to developers, but will be, with the local plan and with a significance-led development framework like this, be in a much stronger position to insist that we want to see, development that echoes and enhances our area. And that you know, I think that is absolutely critical, and I hope that, you know, it will inspire developers too to come forward with some really nice ideas. And I love the impressionistic illustration of the area that's at the start of this report, and if it could be in the end looking like that, I'd be very happy actually. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I can't see anybody else. So, Simon, back to you for any final comments.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa, and thank you, colleagues, for the support on this. I mean, as I say, this is really exciting. I mean, this is where the dryness of planning can actually take on a really much more fun and engaging approach, if you like, because you're talking to people and their lives and what it means to them. And it's all about what we call sustainable development. Again, I mentioned that again, how important it is that the economy, the community, and the environment are all tied together under the same importance in that respect. And actually, we're seeing that already. We're seeing certainly some economic improvements in that area. New businesses are moving in. But at the same time, the community has come together. The cultural consortium is now forming itself into a CIC. And as Teresa mentioned, the Pact is quite an exciting place to go, which you wouldn't think so a couple of years ago, but it is now. So there's a lot of really good things happening there. And the future is rosy, I think, for this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Is the recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll wait for Harinder to come back. He's back. Next time, that door. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Let's move on to item 19, page 759, public space protection orders, alcohol control. Tris, over to you.
Thank you very much. I also welcome my colleague back to his desk over here. So enforcement in Medway is really important. You will know that there's a series of different arms to this with the creation of my role. So people will be aware of the moving streets agenda, the parking enforcement, the introduction of school streets and red routes, amongst other things, to get our towns moving and to ensure that our enforcement and safety of residents is put at the paramount. The second element of this was at last full council, where we're looking at planning, enforcement and in detail and supporting that team in a better and more driven way with the resources that they need. The third element of this is around community safety, and people will be aware that we have led on PSPO Medway-wide around nuisance biking and e-scooters and other types of resident concern on our parks, and that Medway-wide PSPO was incredibly popular and was driven in record time through this council by our officer team and passed at full council last year, due for implementation by the end of March. In conjunction with that, we've also working in partnership on other enforcement issues as well. It's ensuring our licensing policies across events and a number of other areas are considered. So enforcement is seen holistically, and this proposal around a public space protection order specifically links to alcohol control. And the concerns that are around in our high streets around consumption of this and the outcomes of that in terms of antisocial behaviour, in terms of low-level crime and issues associated with consumption of alcohol in significant quantities. The appendices will highlight the consultation responses, though a much smaller number did respond because these alcohol control zones previously existed. There are many who are in support of these. The challenge with this will come in terms of the resources we allocate to enforce, and I can say over the next couple of months you'll be seeing additional news items on how we're going to go about enforcing this, and there's some innovative solutions that we will be taking forward around enforcement to ensure that many of our high streets not just have alcohol control zones, but actually officers are patrolling and dealing with the challenges of alcohol in our town centres and city centres. And that is something that has been raised consistently with the police as well. And I know I've sat down with many councillors, including Gillingham members, who made it very clear about their concerns in some of their town centres, also in Strood as well. So these are issues which many urban councillors have raised. and we will be taking those forward. So it is a hope that this policy, first of all, will not just be a standalone piece of paper that can be filed away, or even just displays on another sign on another high street, but actually over the next 6 months we will be realised through resource allocation as well. And I'm quite excited actually that if we take the policies of this administration, that we are seeing antisocial behaviour falling. That was highlighted in the Community Safety Report last year. We are seeing an expansion of use of technologies to catch fly tipping, to work with local authorities around the country, and we actually work in partnership with many authorities as well in the region. So I'm really content with this report. It can't be just seen as a standalone, though it is itemised as such on this, and I would encourage members to support this item. Just lastly, I want to just pay tribute to my public health and to Councillor Murray and her teams on this. People will be aware that alcoholism isn't just an enforcement issue. There is a necessity for wraparound services. Many of those people with alcoholism have mental health disorders and concurrent drug dependencies, and actually having that service as a support network for those people. And also lastly around selective licensing and our support for temporary accommodation that Councillor Khan's been leading on as well, that will allow people to gain access to accommodation and allow them to be appropriately reviewed. So there is quite a lot of cross-cutting work happening to try and challenge this issue and issues of temporary accommodation and people on our streets. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tris. Any member? Teresa.
Yes, thank you, Tris, and thank you for the tribute that you've paid to public health. I think in the round, we've got to think about this as a problem that we can solve together. Alcohol can be a problem for people that ruins their lives, actually, and being able to have the ability to work within the restrictions, to refer people to sources of help, I think is going to be incredibly important. And I know that the officers who will be enforcing this are being trained in awareness of it. And when we had the drug and alcohol partnership together, we talked about providing training for those who sit on our licensing committee, for example, about the dangers of alcohol, so that when an application comes in, they can actually consider the way that the placing of a place that can sell alcohol might have a deleterious impact on people who suffer from problems from alcohol. So I think this is something that cuts right across the council. It's not just about enforcement, it's about helping people, it's about supporting people, it's about understanding the dangers. And as the guidance said, the perspective of victims needs to be taken into consideration. And for many of the areas where people consume a lot of alcohol and then make trouble and get out of control, the people who live there are victims. You know, they suffer damage to their properties, damage to cars sometimes, you know, very unwelcome noise and disturbance. Nobody wants to stop people enjoying themselves. This is about doing so responsibly and making sure that where people are not being responsible, where they are out of control, where they have got problems, there's a source of enforcement and help to pick them up. So I think it's a really good example of a way our services can work together to make something better.
Thank you, Teresa. Any other member? If not, go back to you, Tris, for any closing remarks.
Just to thank Ruth DeLu and her team for this report, and for all officers for the work they've done in terms of the consultation and presenting that to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tris. The recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, colleagues. Let's move on to item 20, the Council Plan Monitoring Report and Strategic Risk Summary. Again, a reminder, of course, this is not our council plan. That will be coming forward at the annual council. We look forward to seeing the consultation responses. Again, we're consulting on that as we speak. I wanted to just pull out a couple of highlights. Well, one in particular, of course, is around the risk register and the two new risks on there, one around adult social care financing, and I'm sure others may wish to speak to that. But importantly, of course, the risks around Wharf. And again, thanks to the report and the recommendation to full council, that is a very clear indication of the practical way we're managing that risk as best as possible. That was something none of us could have expected, but absolutely it's right and appropriate. It's within our strategic risk summary as we go forward. I'll pause at that point. Colleagues may wish to comment on anything within the report. or they may not. No? Okay, that's helpful. Colleagues happy to agree the recommendations as laid out in the report? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 21, South Thames Gateway Building Control Partnership Business Plan. Nishaba, over to you.
Thank you, Vince. So this report sets out the business plan for 24-27 for the South Thames Gateway Building Control Partnership, which is a partnership between Medway Council and 3 other local authorities, Swale, Gravesham and Canterbury, in order to support our building control services. And the report is set out for Cabinet's approval, but also for it to be noted that a contribution of 141,763 has also been set out as part of this, which is our contribution towards the partnership. Now, I just want to make clear that we pay the most out of the local authorities that are in the partnership, but that is because of our size and scale. So just to provide that clarity. And also, as you can see at 7.2 and 7.3 on page 980, it sets out how having this partnership means that we are given a service which we would otherwise have to pay a lot more for if we weren't part of it. It works really well, and it's something that we are continually reviewing and looking at in terms of the support that we get through Medway, but also the partnership is something that gives us a lot of collaboration and the ability to share resource at a time when a lot of local authorities are facing a challenging time. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I hope that colleagues will support this today. But I just wanted to flag the reason for those figures and also just to point out the differences in the money that we are saving as being part of this.
No, that's very, very helpful. It's always helpful whenever documents like this are reported, of course. We are not a district or a borough council, so comparing our figures to theirs is never a helpful thing necessarily without that context. And I wholeheartedly support this recommendation. I think it's a really good example of collaborative working that's been in place for some time, and recognising that, you know, for all the criticism of the previous administration, of which I have many, the fact that they entered into this originally is a good thing, and we're absolutely going to keep doing that because it's the right thing for taxpayers and actually particularly for those who are using the services, making sure that the buildings that we've got going up, of which I hope we see many, 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 are safe and secure. Any other colleague? No. Nishaba, back to you.
Don't think I have anything further to add, but thank you for the support.
Thank you. Colleagues happy with the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on to obviously the next 3 reports, of course. I'd ask colleagues to avoid moving into blue papers, although they're not blue on our screen these days. So, Nishaba, over to you for item 22, Gateway 3 contract award for some of the HRA services.
Thank you. So this is again the approval of a contract award for HRA repairs and maintenance as set out in the exempt appendix, which colleagues will obviously have oversight of. The contract for our repairs and maintenance was due to come to an end in August 24, so a procurement process has been undertaken and an award given, so this is asking colleagues to approve that. There are some changes to the contract in terms of what we have previously had through this award, and again the next item will also pick up that, but they are set out at 3.10, so it gives you an overview of what was in the current contract and what the new contract will focus on specifically, and there are some changes with gas, electrical and other compliance work streams which have been taken out of this particular area, but again hopefully this will meet colleagues' approval tonight.
Thank you very much indeed. Any colleagues? No, if there's nothing else, colleagues happy to agree to recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move to a very similar but different item next. Nishaba, back to you.
Yes, I'm just going to find the correct page.
Page 1007.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So, in line with the previous report, this is now the contract award of our retender towards our commercial gas contract. Again, there is the exempt item which sets out how this has been managed through the procurement process. So, if colleagues have any questions, I'm happy to pick those up. And again, this is a contract which has been part of, I think, under 3.27. You can see what the new contract will include. And as I stated in the previous paper, you can see at 3.210 what the current contract includes, and then 3.211 what the new contract will focus on delivering.
Thank you, Nashaba. Any colleagues, any comments? No? Happy to support the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. And then finally, for last report, page 1031. My goodness me. Nashaba, back to you for Gateway 1/Gateway 3.
Thank you, Vince. So as colleagues will be aware, that we were awarded funding through the Brownfield Land Release Fund in order to bring forward certain sites across Medway, Brownfield sites. What this report is asking for is a direct award as set out at 6.31 to be made to MDC, one of our LATCOs, with reference to bringing forward Mountbatten House, which is of course a key strategic site as part of the wider regeneration of Chatham Town Centre, and a site that we've discussed in detail before. So the details are set out in the report in terms of the award amount, and the ask is for a direct award to be provided.
Thank you very much, Nashaba. Any colleague? I'll say a couple of bits before we finish. I absolutely support this. It's the right and appropriate thing to do. Since we've last met as a cabinet, we've had the first of the new stakeholder boards for both MDC and Kindy. So again, importantly, putting in those strategic oversights which are important. We were very clear, and SIPFA were very clear. Actually, there shouldn't be elected representatives on boards, and we've taken that approach straight away, and it's the right thing to do, so I absolutely welcome that. And of course, this is important investment, so £940,000 into supporting housing in Medway. Of course, I want an MP for that area who wants that housing to happen. I don't want an MP who wants to waste that money by demolishing the building. So I would encourage everybody in Medway who can have that opportunity when it comes to make that happen. Nashaba, back to you.
No, nothing further to add, but again, thank you for the support. I think this is a really key development that we need to bring forward, and one that we are committed to as administration.
Thank you very much. Nashaba, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of your evening.
you.